Can you imagine watching an ad about gold and you spend your life savings trying to get the gold? In this first story, which raises a lot of common sense, the question is being asked, where's my gold? Here's Lisa Guerrero.
You see them everywhere, especially on cable.
Protect yourself from outrageous inflation. Buy gold.
Ads selling gold as a great investment in times of economic distress, like the pandemic.
There's only one asset class that performs consistently well in times of economic turmoil.
But all these folks say the gold investments offered by a different company called Regal Assets caught their eye.
Regal Assets is the only gold company endorsed by celebrity investors, such as Laura Ingraham.
The only company I trust with the process is Regal Assets.
When I decided that I wanted to protect my money, I looked at different companies and I was impressed with Regal Assets.
Lawrence Fernandez, a retired CBS TV editor, says he invested nearly everything he had, over $1 million. But he says all that gold never came.
It's out in the ether somewhere, it just vanished.
Fernandez and all these other investors are now part of a Facebook group calling themselves Victims of Regal Assets. Altogether, they say they've lost over $10 million. How much money did you end up losing altogether?
All of it. All of it.
Your entire life savings?
Yes.
We're still missing $391,760.
So how much money altogether did you and your husband lose through Regal Assets?
$483,000.
It has been very hard. We had to ask for a loan recently to pay some bills.
This is the CEO and founder of Regal Assets, Tyler Gallagher.
Inflation's, it's on the rise.
He lived lavishly in Beverly Hills and was driven around town in a luxury car, chauffeured by Kyle Chernak. He says Gallagher was a loose cannon and often drunk.
He was eating these chocolate-covered mushrooms, the psychedelic mushrooms covered in chocolate.
So he was doing drugs and drinking throughout the day, every day.
Every day.
I mean, greed is a hell of a drug.
Kevin Snyder, who sold investments at Regal Assets for a year before he says he was let go for financial reasons, says Gallagher's top aide was Leah Donoso, the president of the company.
She ran the entire back end with all the shipping and tracking and security of the metals, so I couldn't see how she didn't know. I feel bad for anyone else that gets caught up in whatever she's doing.
Many of the investors we spoke to tell the same story, saying that Leah Donoso happily took their retirement money and then spoon-fed them lies about when they'd receive their gold. But after months of delays and their gold still missing, they say they soon started to fear the worst. We caught up with Leah Donoso in a parking lot in Waco, Texas.
Hi, we'd like to talk to you about Regal Assets.
No comment, thank you.
Did you take advantage of your investors?
No comment, thank you.
So where is Tyler Gallagher today? Well, apparently not in Beverly Hills anymore. He's reportedly moved to the Middle East nation of Dubai, known for its wealth and lively nightlife.
I would tell him to keep running because I want to put him in jail for life. I feel very vengeful. I'm not a forgiving person.
What kind of a man does this to people like us? To God-loving, God-fearing people that are just trying to do good for themselves.
Now, most of these folks say they're left wondering if they'll have to find new jobs instead of enjoying their retirement.
It hurts. I had a lot of plans. Now they have to be altered. I want to see justice. I want to see him arrested.
Tyler Gallagher did not respond to our request for comment. His top aide, Leah Donoso, says she is cooperating with authorities.
Common sense alert. If you're thinking about investing your retirement in gold like this, you need to have prior knowledge or do research before you start doing this. That way you'll know better. But a lot of times it's just, we don't care. We don't want to know, we don't care. So, that's what happens a lot of times, but, what can be done about this? You need to be doing your homework beforehand, get references, and don't spend your life savings. If you follow these tips, you will not get ripped off, but if he was found, he would tell his side of the story about why he did it. The president was like, I don't want to talk about it. But it was like, well, I don't want to talk. Do your own thing, but I'm not talking. You choose to behave, you choose the consequence. You choose to take people's money, you choose to take advantage of them. Like the sweetheart swing we talked about. These young women take advantage of the elderly, and look where it got them. Losing a lot of money. Do your homework and do your research beforehand. That way you know what you're doing. So, do other cities target black people? Other city police officers target black people because of racial profiling? When we come back, more of the investigation, including states and cities that racially profile. You don't want to miss this, so stay with us. Yesterday, we started looking into racial profiling. Law enforcement officers targeting African Americans because of the color of their skin. We focused on Timothy Thomas, to where he had several traffic tickets for driving without a license, to not wearing a seatbelt. He missed court dates. He didn't want to go to jail, so he avoided those court dates. And that's where he got shot, in a dark alley back in 2001. It's something that former President George W. Bush said he wanted to put an end to right before 9/11. That was one of his campaigns. We also looked into the police reports and tickets that suggest that white officers target black Americans. The Cincinnati police say they deny it ever happened. But the question is, do other cities and other states target African Americans because of the same thing? If you remember, we also showed you a report from John Quinones all about driving while black. It's very similar. So the question is, do other cities in the United States target African Americans because of the color of their skin? Once again, John Larson.
Using open records laws in different states, Dateline compiled and analyzed every single traffic stop or ticket issued in more than a dozen major cities where race was noted. More than 4 million stops or tickets overall. We used every bit of data that was available. Data, in many cases, that has never been analyzed before. From San Diego to Boston, we found patterns of uneven law enforcement and stories of African Americans like those Dateline gathered here. All law-abiding citizens who appear to have been stopped by police because of the color of their skin.
I just feel like I'm under attack by the law.
Andrew Coffer of St. Louis, Missouri, a 17-year-old honor student who says he was pulled over several times on his way to high school.
Were you wearing anything that could have gotten you in trouble?
I went to a private high school. There was a dress code, so we could wear no blue jeans. It had to be a collared shirt, khakis.
He says police would often give him no reason for the stop. Andrew's father, Andre Coffer, has little trouble believing his son. Andre is an accountant, a Sunday school teacher, and owns his own business. He says police have pulled him over more than 20 times.
What kind of reasons do they give you for pulling you over?
We've had a lot of burglaries in the area. You're in a nice car. Is this your car? Like problem with your license plate, tail light, just anything to pull you over. We keep some bail money at home, just in case I get locked up, so that I can get out.
We told the group, in almost every city Dateline examined across the country, police pulled over and ticketed blacks for non-moving violations at a rate higher than whites. In Minneapolis and Houston, we found police stopped blacks for non-moving violations at a rate 50% higher than whites. In Massachusetts, we looked at ticketing patterns in Springfield, Worcester, and Boston. In all of them, police ticketed black drivers at a rate 3 times higher than white drivers. This Boston civic leader says that doesn't surprise him, because he's been pulled over.
He said, your registration had expired. Well, I knew that was incorrect because I had just recently renewed my registration.
Did you ever feel like, well, maybe I should complain about this to the president of the NAACP?
No, because I was the president of the NAACP.
In Kansas City, Missouri, St. Louis, and San Diego, Dateline's research revealed black drivers are twice as likely to be stopped and ticketed for non-moving violations. Janice Jones says it happened to her in St. Louis as she pulled out of a gas station.
I asked him, "Officer, why did you pull me over?" He says, "Because you have no headlights." I tell him, "Officer, I do have headlights. They automatically come on when you turn my car on."
Her husband, the former press secretary for the mayor of East St. Louis, says it happened to him too, but not nearly as many times as it's happened to his son.
Or 1 or 2 times?
No. Higher.
10?
Higher.
15?
Higher.
Get out of here.
No, sir.
How many times do you think they pulled him over?
A little over 20 times.
In Denver, police stopped African Americans for non-moving violations more than 3 times the rate of whites. These 4 high school friends from Denver say they've all been stopped in the last year for what they believe to be ridiculous reasons.
"Oh, well, your tire was kind of low, so that's why we pulled you over." He sticks his head inside of my car and starts looking around and points to the air freshener in my window and says he pulled me over for the air freshener.
They're just pulling you over to see if you have drugs, guns, or anything else, see if you got warrants or anything like that.
And that angers Vietnam veteran James Bonds from Worcester, Massachusetts, who says it happened to him in Shrewsbury, coming home from a Veterans of Foreign Wars meeting.
You know, sitting here hearing these other stories, I'm really appalled. These young people here, especially from Denver, these are the guys that we send to Iraq to drive the Humvees, to drive the Jeeps. They don't get racial profile over there, but they can't drive the kind of car that they want here in their home country. I think America should be ashamed.
And in Dayton, Ohio and Richmond, Virginia, police ticketed black drivers for non-moving violations at a rate 3 times higher than whites. And again, it wasn't just in high-crime inner cities, but also in low-crime neighborhoods in cities across the country.
I've seen surveys in cities where the evidence is pretty convincing, but I've never seen a nationwide study like the one you've done.
We asked civil rights leader and national chairman of the NAACP, Julian Bond, to look at our findings.
What do you make of this?
There's no explanation for this except that this is racial profiling. This is police seeing a black person and saying, "I suspect that person more than I suspect a white person, and I'm going to stop him, I'm going to ask him questions, and I wouldn't do that to a white person."
The police say that just isn't so. In fact, in 2 cities, Nashville, Tennessee, and Hartford, Connecticut, there was no significant difference in the way whites and blacks were stopped. Remember, we did find blacks ticketed at a much higher rate for non-moving violations in 12 other cities. But the police in those cities told us race plays absolutely no role in how they issue tickets. The police said they are committed to fair and equal treatment of all citizens. So what accounts for the disproportionate ticketing of African Americans that we discovered? Police in Houston, Cincinnati, Kansas City, Springfield, and St. Louis all told us economic forces may be a factor. As the St. Louis police put it, inner city black drivers may have fewer resources to rectify equipment problems. Other police departments told us that aggressive policing in inner city black communities by definition means more police stops and more tickets being issued. They say that stops criminals and protects victims of crime. Author Shelby Steele believes racial profiling is not the problem.
One of the things that bothers me is the fact that when we intimidate the police and back them up and make them afraid to police inner city communities, then those communities become more vulnerable to crime because the police say, "I'm not going to go in there and have you call me a racist. I'm not going to do my job." And so then there's the drug business right there in the black community allowed to thrive.
35 million African Americans in this country. I mean, the overwhelming majority of African Americans aren't criminals. Should they be treated any differently when they drive down the road by police just because of the color of their skin?
Absolutely not. But this is the irony. If I live in that neighborhood, I want the pretext out. If I'm raising children in that neighborhood, I want to feel that it's being policed.
Do you see the crackheads back there?
Yes, I do. I hear them.
What do you say to police officers that are working in some of these most desperate neighborhoods, where the people are crying for police protection, where drugs have just sort of shredded the fabric of the community, and they're saying, hey, we got to use every tactic we have. We're fighting a losing battle here. Cut us some slack.
I want to say I want you to be aggressive. I want you to do your job. But I want you to use techniques that aren't dependent on racial profiling. I want you to do your job in a fair and just manner, and if you do that, the community will applaud.
In February of 2001, during his first address to Congress, President Bush made a bold promise.
Earlier today, I asked John Ashcroft, the Attorney General, to develop specific recommendations to end racial profiling. It's wrong, and we will end it in America.
The Justice Department announced it would begin investigating local police departments across the country. But that announcement was made just one day before the world changed. As the images of September 11th seared the nation, racial profiling instantly was no longer such a dirty word. Many began wondering if racial profiling was a necessary evil. After all the hijackers had been Middle Eastern. Yet even the current New York City Police Commissioner, Raymond Kelly, who you'd think might be tempted to endorse racial profiling after 9/11, does not.
I think it's dumb policing, much too much of a broad brush. We need specific information.
When Kelly became Commissioner of U.S. Customs in 1998, the department faced allegations of racial profiling. Charges agents were unfairly searching a disproportionate number of minorities for drugs. Kelly demanded new accountability from his customs agents. They began documenting the race of each individual they searched and the reason for the search. What happened? The number of drug searches dropped by 75%, but the drug seizures went up.
Any notion that somehow stopping someone simply because of their race is intelligent policing is not something that I support, and I think it's supported by any of the evidence.
But while law enforcement officials from the president on down say racial profiling is wrong and ineffective, on the street, not everyone can agree where aggressive policing ends and racial profiling begins.
Last week, we stopped a car downtown, loud music. Pulled him over, get felony drug warrants. That's how we police. Small things lead to big things.
I think the police ought to go where the crime is, and they ought to be professional about the way that they conduct their business. Having said that, I don't think racial profiling is much of a problem for Black Americans today.
Still, national civil rights leader Julian Bond questions whether the ends justify the means.
You're driving a wedge between you and the people who want your protection more than anybody else in the community. And until you overcome this enormous handicap that you've imposed, you're not going to be effective law enforcement officers.
And what happened to the president's pledge to end racial profiling? This June, the U.S. Justice Department announced without fanfare its response, a new federal ban on racial profiling. The new federal guidelines spell out that in the making of routine law enforcement decisions, such as deciding which motorist to stop for traffic infractions, consideration of the driver's race or ethnicity is absolutely forbidden. The ban, however, has no effect on local police. Not in Cincinnati, Houston, St. Louis, or any other city's police department. And it lacks two elements experts argue are necessary. Requirements that police record who is stopped and why, and penalties for police who racially profile. Requirements many oppose.
Without penalties, without sanctions, without record-keeping requirements, and without some punishment for failing to keep those records, then this practice will continue.
We asked the Justice Department for an interview to explain how its ban would change things, and it declined, leaving many Americans, including the mother of Timothy Thomas, wondering who will ensure that all Americans will be treated equally under the law.
It's totally different when you're a person of African American descent. It's as if
no matter what you do, you're guilty until proven innocent.
Timothy Thomas's mother and several other Cincinnati residents who were plaintiffs in the racial profiling lawsuit against the city settled. Although the police department denied any wrongdoing, the $4.5 million settlement was the largest in the city's history. Cincinnati and other cities tell us they train their officers and check their performance to make sure they are not profiling. For more information about our report, log on to our website. The address is dateline.msnbc.com.
Okay. Common sense alert when we come back. Stay with us. Welcome back. Common sense alert. You ask police departments, do you racially profile? You say, oh no, we don't racially profile. If they deny it, you show them the proof right away. This report right here will show it all. The bottom line here is this. You cannot be doing that, period. There ain't no excuse to be racially profiled. I mean, white officers pulling over blacks because of the color of their skin? Give me a break. That's racist. I don't tolerate racism on this broadcast. And I never will. But if I did, I never would forgive myself. But what can be done about this? Well, if this happens in your neighborhood, talk to the police, file a report with the officer's name, and then the supervisor will take care of it. And just remember this, if it comes back false, that's filing a false police report and you can go to jail for that. Don't end up like Timothy Thomas. If they ask, can I search your vehicle? Just say, no, officer, I do not consent to a search warrant, to a search under the 4th Amendment. In this case, many police departments violate the 14th Amendment, violate the equal protection for all under the 14th Amendment. A lot of times it's all like, well, we don't care. Alright, now that we got the common sense out of the way, come up next. A woman at your office is pregnant. She's going to miss some work and cost the company money. The question is the company free to pay her less or fire her? Stay with us. A woman at your office is pregnant. She's going to miss some work and cost the company money. So the question is the company free to pay her less or fire her? If you're thinking about taking a maternity leave because of your child, you've had to understand. I mean, think about it. Hank Hill and Bobby in the episode in the King of the Hill episode, Buck Strickland told Hank to take some time off. Hank was like, well, I could do that when Bobby was born, and he came after that. But if you're on paternity leave, you need to take some time off to take care of the child. And a lot of people have been fired. But that would violate the law, would it? Here's John Stossel.
Carrie Lucas is a working mom, vice president of the Independent Women's Forum. She's a writer, and sometimes she's on TV debating issues.
These lawsuits, I don't think are going to accomplish much.
Last summer, Carrie became pregnant. Again.
This will be my 3rd maternity leave in 4 years, and it does mean that I have to take time off.
Oh my goodness. Holly Waters took time off too, years ago when her daughter was born. But she didn't want to take that time off. When she became pregnant, she was a sales consultant for the drug maker Novartis. She says she was a top performer with a promising career.
I thought, wow, this will be a company I want to be with for a very long time.
But then, when she told her boss she was pregnant,
I was constantly being harassed, and I was almost being pushed out the door.
and just as she was about to go on maternity leave, she was fired.
I was 7.5 months pregnant. There was no way I was going to be able to go out and find a job at this point.
But Holly knew that the law is on her side. An outgrowth of the women's movement is the law that says it's illegal to fire or not hire a woman because she's pregnant. Today, employers are warned in a job interview you must never even ask questions like, are you pregnant? Or even, might you start a family? If Congress thought the Pregnancy Discrimination Act would end discrimination, they were wrong. Company after company has been sued. And in recent years, complaints have steadily gone up. Even this maternity clothing chain was sued. And now Holly and some 5,000 other women are suing Novartis. All the companies deny doing anything wrong. And Novartis points out that Working Mother magazine named them as one of the 100 best companies. Holly's lawyer, David Sanford, says that's nonsense, and he's filed a class action lawsuit.
The message is, if you get pregnant, you're in trouble at Novartis.
Sanford wants Novartis to pay his clients and his law firm more than $200 million. The lawsuit, he says, will teach Novartis and other companies not to discriminate.
If you're pregnant, there are certain protections in place, and there should be certain protections in place.
Can you be in charge of that one?
It may surprise you that Carrie Lucas doesn't agree.
If my employer decides they no longer want me as an employee, then it should be their right to fire me. I understand the desire for people to have government step in and try to protect women, but there's real cost to government intervention.
These costs are rarely talked about publicly, but it is a fact that once Congress creates some special protected groups, some employers avoid hiring people who fall into those groups. For example, after the Americans with Disabilities Act became law, it was assumed more disabled people would enter the workplace. But that didn't happen. A study by economists at MIT found employment actually dropped sharply. Likewise, the Pregnancy Act can create problems for women.
Sometimes the laws that are intended to help women like me actually end up hurting women like me. All of a sudden, a potential employer is looking at me and thinking, she just might turn around and sue us. That makes it less likely that I'm going to get hired.
Because you're a kind of lawsuit bomb.
Exactly. When you do things like create discrimination laws, you raise the cost of hiring a woman like me.
And while some pregnant women work harder than any man, Lucas says, let's be honest, most pregnant women impose costs on employers.
A lot of responsibilities are shifted. Each time I go to a doctor's appointment, that means that I'm unavailable to do whatever work needs to be done during that time, which means one of my colleagues is often picking up the slack.
Lucas and her boss made a deal that works for both of them. It's all voluntary.
I love you.
She works fewer hours and also earns less. Both sides consider that fair. Some companies say laws like this and lawsuits like yours make it tougher for women. Because a company doesn't want to hire a woman who might get pregnant because they're scared of you and your lawsuits.
If they do take that position, they'd be violating the law. If companies lose money because of it, and they may, that's not necessarily a bad thing from a societal perspective.
But whose company is it? If you're free to join the company or leave, aren't they free to pay you what they think you're worth or fire you?
And that would be true if we didn't have laws preventing that discrimination.
And we do have those laws. So it raises the question, how would the job market work without discrimination laws?
You don't have to hire me, and I don't have to work for you.
But if that's the case, who would hire pregnant women?
I think plenty of employers would hire pregnant women. BALL. Women are incredibly productive members of the workforce. We have a lot to offer. If an employer is going to discriminate against enough people, it's going to be bad for them in the long run. It's a bad business practice, and that's the best way to prevent discrimination.
I don't need to say more. I think there's enough common sense being raised in this report here. Basically, if any employer, if any company decides to fire pregnant women, they're gonna get sued. My best advice for all these companies: don't do it. If they want to leave They want to leave. They want maternity leave. Then that's their choice. They want to get pregnant. Hell, if they want to get pregnant, hell, that's their choice. We have to respect women no matter what, and I care. I care about everybody. I care about my friends, my family, my family, my coworkers, my friends from work. I care about everybody. If I were to fire someone because they were pregnant, I wouldn't get sued. I'd fess up and say, yes, I did, but I didn't know. Without any training, without any background, think about this. It's like you're in the airport, and you weren't trained on doing what you're supposed to be doing. So, okay, you're driving the cart around, and yet someone goes like, "Hey, scout with the cart. You're not driving it today. You're gonna be secure. You're gonna be checking out for stuff. Don't worry, you'll do good." And you realize, I have not been trained. And then you go with someone saying, "Hey, I don't know what to look for, blah, blah, blah." And they tell you, "Okay, which pistol looks like so-and-so, blah, blah, blah." And you go, and if that happened to me, I would go to my own supervisor and say, "Hey, I wasn't trained." And they told me, "Well, you weren't trained, so keep your mouth shut." I would say, if you do not train me, I will quit. If you assign me to a new job, you will have somebody train me. Because if you don't do this, I quit. And if I have to sue, then that's my choice. It is my choice. Coming up, do you ever wish that noisy neighbors could stop being so noisy when it comes to like playing basketball on airplanes? John Stossel is back to explain. Stay with us. Tap dancing, playing basketball, loud music, loud noises. We're talking about your noisy neighbors. Like they make a lot of noise. Ow! 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 Your neighbor's like, "Shut up! I'm trying to sleep there! Be quiet out there! I'm calling the police!" That's how neighbors are. But don't you wish noisy neighbors could be left alone? Well, there may be some ways. Here again, John Stossel.
Oh, there's no place like home. A quiet, restful haven from a hectic world. Of course, it's not so restful if your neighbor's stereo blasts through his window. Or her dog barks through your nap. Some of you feel attacked in more subtle ways, harassed by the car your neighbor parks in front of your house, the boat that blocks your view, the pet that uses your manicured lawn. These may seem like silly annoyances, but increasingly around the country, neighbors are driving each other crazy. One reason for it may be that we live in more densely packed conditions. When you're close to your neighbor, seemingly small irritations can start huge feuds. Attorney Cora Jordan wrote a book called Neighbor Law.
I don't believe there are any trivial neighbor problems because they continue. And if it happens every day, it becomes more and more and more of a festering sore. Pretty soon you have neighbors out of control.
Things seem fairly out of control at this condominium complex at East Meadow, New York.
But I tried to find homes for them, but these
Frances Palermo and her lawyer were under attack from neighbors fed up with the smell from the 200 cats she's kept in her home.
Frances, you need help. That's the whole problem with this issue, and that's the sad part of it.
Fights about pets are a big category of neighbor disputes.
It must be tough to listen to your neighbors coming after you like this.
They've been complaining since I moved in here.
They say the cats smell, that they have to live with these smells.
Do you smell anything there?
No.
Good. On this day, there wasn't much of a cat smell outside the house. The neighbors said that was unusual. They claimed she cleaned up because we were coming. What did it smell like inside? Well, take a litter box that needs changing and multiply that a couple hundred times. The problem started 2 years ago when she began taking in strays.
I picked them up when they were young, and I want to protect them.
500 cats if you want?
Well, I mean, I know there's a limit.
Actually, when her neighbors complained to city officials, they were told there is no legal limit on how many cats you can have or how much your apartment can smell.
I have had days when I have opened the front door to my house and almost passed out from the stench.
Why is it that she has the right to infringe on my rights?
This dispute may be settled more on issues of cat rights than neighbor justice. Francis has been charged with cruelty to animals because of the poor conditions the cats live in.
We want to be able to go in there and take whatever cat we want out of there.
While we were here, officers from the SPCA showed up, wanting to go inside and check the cat's condition. Francis's lawyer is telling them they can't go inside.
It's virtually impossible because these animals...
While they argued legalities, one angry woman barged in to take a look for herself. The evening became a kind of free-for-all.
Again, I'm not a lawyer. I deliver the issue and summons to every house that's in my house.
Judges say the disputes between neighbors are now clogging the courts.
They get out of control. They end up in court. They end up appealing decisions, taking them all the way up to the state Supreme Court over something quite trivial, spending an absolute fortune.
Most disputes between neighbors are about noise. A barking dog, a lawnmower, a loud stereo. I can understand that. But could you imagine being so annoyed by this sound that you go to court? Go to court for 3 years? Or that this sound could so injure your health that you deserve $2 million in damages? Well, that's what a man here in Encino, California claims. It all started 3 years ago when he came home for an early afternoon nap. And just as he was drifting off to sleep, he heard this.
It just drives me nuts. This is like a percussion sound, like someone playing a drum. And there's no way to get used to it. There's no way to escape it.
Ruben's neighbors were playing basketball about 40 feet from his bedroom. Ruben says he asked them to stop, but they refused.
So I said, well, if you're going to play basketball, you're going to play wet. So I went to get the hose.
He gave his neighbors a good spray. The Soph neighbor, Ken Schill, then sued Ruben for emotional distress. Ruben sued back. Both gentlemen are lawyers. Ruben sued not only Schill, but his children, his psychiatrist, and the maker of the basketball hoop. Aren't you just a bully to sue this psychologist, this poor hoop maker? He's got to hire a lawyer. It doesn't cost you anything.
No, I was sued first. And since they created the party, I was going to show up with what I had to do to protect my rights.
Both Schild and Ruben have been taping each other's outdoor activities. Each says the other's doing it as a harassment campaign. But the Schilds don't want to talk about this on 2020. Both neighbors hired acoustic experts to measure the decibel levels of bouncing balls. Isn't this nuts?
I don't think so. Try drifting off into sleep and hearing it.
But it's just a basketball.
Why don't we have someone bounce a basketball outside and we can see if you can hear it from in here.
So we tried that. A member of our camera crew bounced a ball right outside the house. It was pretty loud. But then we just closed the sliding glass door. That made a big difference. Not so bad with the glass closed.
Lay down and take a nap. Try it.
A court concluded that the noise was loud enough to grant Ruben a restraining order, limiting the basketball to certain hours. But the judge who made that ruling isn't happy with either party.
In front of me are 5 volumes of paperwork that has accumulated in this courthouse since the time that this case was filed. 5 bench officers in this courthouse have heard this case at one time or another. It is truly an abuse of the entire system.
And it's not over yet. An appeals court has now lifted the basketball curfew. Ruben's claim for $2 million in damages is still due to be heard at this Van Nuys courthouse this December. Judge Rowland says these neighbor disputes delay the hearing of more important cases because they are heard first. They're heard first because neighbors' disputes have a big potential for violence.
The court recognizes the intensity of the emotion that is involved in these disputes. How people lose all control.
Here in Huron Township, Michigan, 2 women fought with a neighbor over a pet dog, horses, and the placement of a fence. Now the neighbor's charged with shooting and killing the women. In Houston, this man was convicted of shooting his next-door neighbor, apparently because the neighbor threw trash and branches into his yard. The killing was videotaped by the victim's own security camera.
Boom, we got hit right there.
In Santa Clara, California, this man allegedly shot his neighbor after the neighbor's dog urinated on his morning paper. The victim's brother asks, how can this happen in suburban America?
Why does this happen? It happens partly because anger gets very much out of control.
Dr. Raymond Navaco has been studying the rise in disputes between neighbors.
We have a person that's become intensely angry and doesn't have a feasible solution for dealing with the grievance.
Some experts believe the anger is fueled by the increasing density of cities and suburbs. They point to studies that suggest rodents live comfortably in close quarters until a flashpoint is reached. Then the addition of just one more inspires them to attack each other. Close quarters caused conflict between Jeffrey Gibbons and his neighbors in Huntington Beach, California. The noise from Jeffrey's power tools rips into the peace and quiet, especially for neighbor Cynthia Almanza, whose apartment's only a few yards away.
You know, you're going to have to live with some of it because
This month, Cynthia got Jeffrey to go to a mediation session at the Orange County Dispute Resolution Center.
I'm here to mediate.
Like most rifts between neighbors, this is a battle over right. Cynthia and her roommate's right to quiet versus Jeffrey's right to pursue his hobby. In most of these fights, there is some law that says who's in the right. Cynthia took the time to dig up her city's noise ordinance.
It's also in violation.
The mediators say Cynthia was smart to get a copy of the code, but she missed an important first step.
If you'd have come over and talked to me, you know, we wouldn't even have to go in here.
Most often, the neighbor just needs to be told that there's a problem. Now, telling the neighbor that there's a problem is the crucial part, the approach.
She and other experts suggest complain in steps. First, just a friendly talk about the problem. Then a letter. It's always good if you could include a copy of any law that might apply. Next, if you live in an apartment building, a note to the landlord. Finally, if those don't work, mediation.
And second of all, we're not drilling and sawing and making a lot.
This dispute was resolved when Jeff agreed to limit the hours he'd use his tool. They were able to avoid what Cora Jordan calls the senseless option, fighting it out in court.
What are you going to do after the lawsuit? You still have to live side by side.
The last advice we heard from the experts was fairly obvious, but they say it's something that happens less these days. Talk to your neighbor. Get to know them. It's harder to be unreasonable with a friend.
John, I can see how it takes some intelligence to confront your neighbors with these complaints and do it in a way that isn't counterproductive. It just hardens it.
True, and some courage to do it, but it's so superior to getting a third party involved, because once the lawyer letter comes or the cop car shows up, then you have so much anger you can have a feud that builds forever.
And people really kill each other over these things.
Well, you know, we hardly scratched the surface. I mean, checking the wire report, someone is killed over a fence, over noisy children. A 94-year-old man killed his neighbors over a loud stereo. I was getting old and decided I had to do it sometime. It's just amazing, case after case.
Well, there aren't any answers yet on why, but I think some of your suggestions might ease the individual situations. Thank you, John. We'll be right back.
And speaking of we'll be right back, we're back in a moment with our Common Sense Alert. Stay with us. Alright, Common Sense Alert. If you got problems with this, you're more than welcome to file a complaint, but a noisy basketball? Come on, it's a freaking basketball. You don't want to hear it? Close the damn door. I mean, we play basketball during the day. We don't want to hear it. I mean, neighbors are like Karens. But a neighbor is a neighbor. A neighbor is more than a neighbor. A neighbor is your friend. But these tips will help. Talk to your neighbors. Get to know your neighbors. Mediate. That way you won't go to the police. Tie up in court for years about this. If you do those things, as John said, you won't go to court and you won't pay fines or go to jail. I'm proud to have neighbors out there who support me what I do. I don't go out and sing during the night. So and so, this and this. But yeah, you probably get the picture here. It's just that enough's enough. We don't need to freaking tell our neighbors, hey, shut up. We don't want to hear that. All we want peace and quiet. Yes. We want to hear some basketball and talk to our neighbors. Good. Get to know your neighbors and understand this. If you don't like it, shut the door and just ignore it. You want to take your nap? Go ahead and take a nap. But if you don't like the noise out there, you just freaking ignore it. How simple is it to ignore? Ignore. I-G-N-O-R-E. A 5 to 6 letter word. Ignore. It's not that hard to ignore, for crying out loud. I mean, you may go complaining, you're turning going, hey, some kids playing some basketball, I don't like it. I mean, you may complain over someone smashing their head in the hole and going, babe, what's going on here? I'm trying to read the paper here. Shut up. We don't want to hear it. I mean, yeah, we beat them in a long, but if you don't like it, ignore it. Move out of the neighborhood if you have to. Try to understand. Neighbors are your friends, and if you don't, and try to get to know your neighbors. That way you'll know they don't like this noise, then just don't do it. You want to be tied up in court? Tie up in court. But try to understand here. Peace and quiet is what we need. But you can be arrested for disturbing the peace. That's a whole nother show. And speaking of a whole nother show, coming up on Give Me a Break Wednesday, it's all about heat safety. Throughout all this week here in Corpus, there is a heat wave going on. How can you stay safe from a heat wave? We're going to explain to you some tips about what you can do to stay safe. From staying hydrated to having your AC cranked up to the cool setting. That way you'll save your bills and go to the cooling center. We'll help you out here. We'll help you out here on Give Me a Break Wednesday. That's it for Monday going to Tuesday. Give Me a Break Monday going to Tuesday. We'll see you again for Give Me a Break Wednesday. For everyone here at YouTube, concentration, not strength, have a good night.